in the colonial model, right, which was very elite-led, which was all about patronage systems. You sort of woo and co-opt a village chief and rule a village, right, and so on and so forth. So that kind of post-colonial model has been around, but this time people did seem galvanized, right? They did see there was a large voter turnout, the youth population, and it perhaps even surprised the sort of pre-electoral machinations, might not have predicted the kind of voter turnout and the kind of endorsement that the independents got, in Pakistan. I mean, I think that there's need to sort of understand how, when you have civil military imbalances, it's not to say that there isn't a local power grab by the military establishment, and often it has to do with regional security insecurities, but it also has to do with, sort of other factors which are grounded in a certain history, and they are grounded in a certain geostrategic, context.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Wave Global. My name is Norris Rana, and I'll be your host for today's program. Today, we will be covering the political economy landscape related to Pakistan's recently concluded elections. We've been talking a lot about the elections, but in this program, we'll be coming up from some different viewpoints. We want to see how the international dynamics are likely to influence and shape Pakistan's, trajectory going forward. We will also be talking about the role of the military and how it is likely to shape and evolve, given that now we have a democratically elected government at the helm of affairs. And in order to join me for this discussion, I have with me a social scientist, a very prominent anthropologist, Syed Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali works as an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins and American University and is also a non-resident fellow at the Middle East Institute. So thank you so much for joining us, Muhammad Ali. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Okay.
So before I turn the mic towards you, I just want to set the stage a bit for the discussion. These elections that were recently held happened at a time when Pakistan is going through a poly crisis. And therefore, a lot of importance was attached to these elections in order to bring the needed economic and political stability. The events of the last 1.5 year, 2 years leading up to the elections were very tumultuous. There was this vote of no confidence against the former Prime Minister Imran Khan that led to his ouster. Following that, there was some, disruptions. Well, I'm trying to imply the events of May 9th. After that, there was an unprecedented amount of military-led crackdown on PTI supporters and PTI's leadership as well, which pretty much led to the dismantling of the party. And all in all, the electoral symbol was taken away from them. Imran Khan was indicted in a number of cases just a week prior to the elections, which signaled the fact that the establishment was implicitly or explicitly favoring another party, which is the PML-N. And now we have the results of the election in front of us. A coalition government is being formed between the PML-N and the Pakistan People's Party, the PPP, which may lead to questions around the legitimacy, the authenticity, and the credibility of the questions, both the environment that was created prior to the elections and then the things that ensued on the day and night of the election as well. This has led to some grievances among the masses who may feel, rightly or unrightly so, I wouldn't go into that argument, but the thing is that the prevailing sentiment is that their mandate may have been stolen. Now, the need was to really heal the country, leverage these elections as a way of, gaining political stability. But I personally feel that is not where we're heading towards, or that has not really been achieved via the elections. How do you look at this entire environment and this entire chapter that is unfolding in front of us?
I mean, if you look at, what's kind of happened over the past 2 decades, I mean, not only in our part of the world, but I mean, as a broader phenomena, and it's still on an upward swing. I mean, this idea of the decline of sort of democratic norms. So, while 20 years ago, when people started talking about globalization and its discontents, we started seeing a rise, initially slowly when there was still euphemism around the idea of sovereignty becoming redundant in this era of globalization, and the inequities that were, implicit in it started giving rise to sort of more xenophobia, giving rise to sort of more authoritarian populist regimes, and this has happened in Eastern Europe, and take the example of Hungary. It's certainly happening in many parts um, of the global South, including South Asia, right? And we've seen, while there hasn't been since 2008, there hasn't been um, explicitly military-led rule in a country like Pakistan. This idea of hybridization, it's a new term. I mean, if you kind of look back into Pakistan's political history, that kind of influence behind the scenes, existed in the 90s and earlier. So, now we now have, a setup again. The writing was on the wall that, probably now with the PTI, which had been backed by the establishment in the last electoral cycle, having become the underdog, and now there'll be some kind of hybridization 2.0, if you will, in terms of a governance model. And we're probably going to see a coalition, a weak coalition come to the fore. And, despite the very surprising sort of, turnout, rather than just disgruntlement, Pakistan is used to, seeing apathy, sort of disdain, around the electoral process, the elite capture of vote banks. So, those are phenomena which have existed since decades now, and I would argue have precedents in the colonial model, right, which was very elite led, which was all about patronage systems. You sort of woo and co-opt a village chief and rule a village, right, and so on and so forth. So that kind of post-colonial model has been around, but this time people did seem galvanized, right? They did see there was a large voter turnout, the youth population, and it perhaps even surprised sort of, the sort of pre-electoral machinations, might not have predicted the kind of voter turnout and the kind of endorsement that the independents got. But so many fail-safes had been put into place, with the fragmentation of the PPP, or sorry, of the PTI, and and all the sort of other legalistic barriers that had been placed in front of it, that it was inevitable that they would be denied a chance of taking over the helm of affairs at the federal level. I mean, in the KP, and that's kind of a Damocles' sword, because they have now still have the potential to form the KP government. And I mean, if they become agitational, then there are mechanisms, right, like governors' rule and other means to try and keep the PTI's disgruntlement in check, and how they whip up public sentiment. So that is kind of the scenario as it's unfolded over these past few weeks.
So, thank you for your response. And actually, based on what you just shared, it begs an additional two questions that are just coming up, they're just propping up in my mind. So I'll share the first one with you. So you've mentioned about how the writing was on the wall, given that, even prior to, this election cycle, there was a hybrid regime that was active when the army sided with Imran Khan. And then post 2022, there was a shift in whom the establishment wanted to side in favor with. But now that the elections have concluded, now we see that coalition government is being formed, which is democratically elected, at least on paper. How do you think the role of the army will evolve? Will the army take a step back, or will we see another manifestation of the hybrid 2.0 regime? Because, personally, the army might also want to work on its image, given that, the sentiment really not has been is to some degree questionable regarding the role of the army intervening in Pakistani politics, and people don't really feel so good about that. And evident from the events that happened on May 9th and afterwards.
Well, I mean, of course, the military has had a very complicated role, in Pakistan. I mean, but I think that there's need to sort of, understand how when you have civil military imbalances, it's not to say that there isn't a local power grab by the military establishment, and often it has to do with regional security insecurities, but it also has to do with sort of other factors which are grounded in a certain history and they are grounded in a certain geostrategic, context. So, I mean, of course, we know in the case of Pakistan, in more recent years, I mean, if you look at the 10-year sort of a lifeline that the Musharraf regime got, because of the good or good or bad sort of support was lending post 9/11. If you look at during the 1980s and the Zia, 10 years of Zia's rule, when it was the proxy jihad against the Soviets in Afghanistan. If you earlier look at sort of, the Ayub Khan years and, which brought in sort of, the Harvard um, version of economic development, which that model has changed over the past many decades, but his golden rule was also, supported with a lot of generous aid for Pakistan joining SEATO and CENTO. So those are the more recent examples. We can talk about the current situation now, but let me take you a little further back. I mean, into history. If you look at, post-Mansabdari system, which was one way that the Mughal Empire used to sort of, have not only do resource
Yeah.
extraction, but had, sort of armies deployed in times of need. You had these sort of ideas of laws of diminishing return, the ideas of sort of peasant proprietorship, which was, a way of thinking beyond feudalism. But the way that it played out in the Indian subcontinent, you could look at sort of the British investments, irrigational investments, and the way that they organized sort of the extraction of agricultural products to fuel the Industrial Revolution. That had also created a space in the agrarian political economy. I mean, land was the most powerful commodity, right? As Fanon had said, to rule over land is to rule over people.
Yeah.
And at that time, not only did we have the creation of the current sort of electables, many prominent families which were co-opted, which supported the colonial rule, being rewarded for it, benefiting from it, but also the military establishment, the Ghodapal scheme, etc. These large dairy farms that were servicing, the military establishment, and then people who helped with the recruitment process, who did not go against the British, during the 1857 war, being rewarded, and these reward mechanisms stayed in place, for to reward veterans of the First and Second World War who had helped with the recruitment, right? And we know of very prominent, political names. If you go back a generation or so, you see that kind of, servicing to the colonial administration. And that precedent was, of course, carried forward by by the current, by post development, post independence Pakistan. And of course, it was then, it kept mutating over time. So we saw, from agrarian land, we saw the creation of DHAs, etc. But this, and this was aided and abetted by this broader governance model, which was based on the idea that if you want to rule a village, you sort of buy the local chief, and it went all the
Mm.
way up. So these patronage models, right, how they worked hand in glove, with sort of the local elites. I mean, this is a system that has, I mean, if you look at the establishment, it's not only the military, right? It's also the bureaucracy. And there's a lot of people from Hamza Albi to so many others. I mean, Asha Jalal as well, just written something again about sort of, these authoritarian governance models. They play out slightly differently. I mean, yes, India, the largest
Mm.
democracy, uninterrupted elections, the military, remains, bound to its constitutional role. But I mean, is India a robust democracy? What about Bangladesh? So,
mm,
and they flirted with some martial law, and then how sort of that, turned into the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, and how that's been now suppressed by Sheikh Hasina and, her dynastic
mm,
rule. So, these are complicated factors, and I think that it's not so that civil military balance. I mean, if we now come back to more current times,
yeah,
remember how, when Prime Minister Imran Khan, when he was falling out of grace, had started pointing to the US,
mm,
and I remember clearly, I mean, sitting here, this kind of sigh of relief almost in the think tank community. I mean, I don't know the minds of the establishment here, but at least people who interact with them, noticing that, the military establishment is now parting ways with the Imran Khan,
mm,
Imran Khan's very authoritarian, narcissistic,
mm,
ad hoc way of doing foreign policy and sort of, engaging with the West. And, sort of better sense is prevailing. And, so that is something that was kind of welcomed. And, besides the rhetorical sort of statements here or there and the concern being expressed, I mean, do we actually see, any sort of real desire, any appetite to bring about real democracy anywhere, in the world? So, I think it's in that broader context that these localized sort of machinations, this institutional hegemony of the most, empowered
mm.
state institution in Pakistan needs to be also understood.
So you actually very rightly so and aptly mentioned about the very ad hoc and arbitrary foreign policy during the time of PTI's rule, and then by the end of it, closer to 2022, there was this huge controversy surrounding the wire, and that was sent by the ambassador, and where Mr. Imran Khan blamed the US-backed administration of trying to topple his government. But now, fast forward to 2024, we see that, and apparently it was the news yesterday. I'm not sure how authentic that may be, but it has been making the headlines that Imran Khan has made some has made some demonstrative calls to the international organizations such as the IMF, and is also calling upon the US administration to look into the malpractices that the PTI is claiming have happened to take place during these recently concluded elections. And there was also in the news that he's asked that the IMF, before agreeing on another bailout program, should reevaluate and revisit given the human rights practices that have been being employed in Pakistan, the election against that has been taking place. So, in that essence, how do you feel the relationship between the West and Pakistan is likely to evolve? And how, in your point of view, you're based in DC, you're very well embedded in the think tank policy circle as well. How are they viewing this election cycle and the claims of riggings that are being made? And is there any possibility of the West, whether that's the US administration, the international organizations, or other bilateral partners, taking note of PTI's claim and reacting to it or responding to it?
There has been rhetorical admission, there's been, sort of letters written, and I think a lot of it has to do with sort of the Pakistani diaspora here, within the US, people in positions of affluence, and many of them sort of, see also Imran Khan as this charismatic leader who can speak his mind, right? And they have been, I think, and it's an interesting sort of position that they have put themselves in, and to create distance with this kind of uncomfortable truth about Imran Khan flagging this this attempt to basically to subvert the democratic government in Pakistan. And of course, there's a history, and it rang, it sort of it touched a nerve clearly amongst the local populace, which had been subjected to 20 years of, sort of post 9/11 sort of fallout within Pakistan, no matter what the Pakistani state's position was, in the global war on terror. But so I think the local American Pakistanis kind of felt that, they have a right as dual citizens, right, to apply pressure on, on American policymakers to try and uphold this principle of democracy. I think there's still no love lost for Imran Khan.
Mm.
I think it was at least embarrassing because the US has, I mean, if you look at Mossadegh, if you look elsewhere, so many places around the world, I mean, Chile, with the Inca, with bringing in Pinochet, etc. So there's a long history of American involvement. It's just like this is not the way to have done it, and the U.S. still exercises considerable influence around the world, but does so including our part of the world, but in different ways. So, so it's ironic that while Imran Khan was like decrying, and this I remember going to the Minare Pakistan gathering the
Mm.
first time that it was coming to the fore and taken as a serious political player when there was this very elaborate,
Mm.
public
Yeah.
gathering that he did. And he'd
In
been railing against the
2011, yeah.
IMF. Right. Excuse me.
In 2011, I reckon it happened.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So, and he had a, in a sense, he had a point because he said that, look, I mean, we try with simplistic rendering, and you probably have a better sense of this, but I remember him saying that, we get into these foreign debts, and then we
Mm.
start, in particular, he's talking about the IMF, and look at how much we have, money we have to spend on servicing those debts. And and then at the same time we are pressured to depreciate, the rupee, and that increases, while the idea is that, hey, it's going to make us more competitive internationally. The way that our economy is, it doesn't really do a lot of that. But
Mm.
what we do is start ending up paying more dollars, right?
Yeah.
So he said, I want to break the begging bowl. Others have said it too, but the IMF loan is a way, in which the international community and the US administration can still exercise some influence because that loan is desperately needed.
Mm.
What good that loan is going to also do is, again, a very lengthier topic. I mean, if we look at, the ability of, the IMF to bring about sustainable pro-poor growth, I mean, is again a
Mm.
very contested topic.
Yeah.
So, but those difficult decisions, would need to be met. So, I mean, like public spending is going to become a no-no again, right? And because the loans have to be serviced, the security establishment is going to take its own pound of flesh, and the
Mm.
market mechanism is going to be used to try and bring about, to put Pakistan back enough on its feet where it can serve, in the lower cogs of the global political economy, which is extractive right up to the top. I mean, if you look at the one percenters, for instance, which are that discrepancy between growth and inequality is something that plays out around the world, and it's going to play out in Pakistan, countries like Pakistan as well, and where there's little institutional capacity, little prospects of growth, that the chances are that that stress is passed on, to the population further, and there's already polarization. So it is, in the security sense, in the sense of the climate, which is again not Pakistan's doing, what it's suffering right now. All those stresses do exist, and now we have a weak coalition that has to try and manage this process using the existing mechanisms, which are lopsided, and problematic in their own right. But yeah, that's the way that I think it's going to continue going.
Actually, that's a great segue into my next question, and I was just going to come to that. You've just mentioned in the end that it's a weak coalition, and rightly so. It is a weak coalition because it is formulated between a merger of the second and the third largest party, and it doesn't. It completely. It's not led by the PTI-backed independents who secured the highest number of majority seats in the National Assembly. Anyhow, there's this narrative that has been created, just narrative or unjust. I wouldn't really go into that argument, but people do feel aggrieved that their mandate has been stolen, And PTI has been quite vocal about the fact that, again, there was systematic rigging that happened prior to the elections as well as on the day and the night of the election. All in all, this puts the coalition government in a very weak spot given the trust and the acceptance that it tends to generate from the public, from the masses. And now we are looking ahead, and the country is still in a policy crisis, and there's some key and tough economic decisions that need to be made. And usually, those tough economic decisions mean that they are not populist in nature. They are further going to put the pressure on the common man, and the brunt will be faced by people, the citizens of the country. When you bring these two sets together, the equation doesn't seem very optimistic. It seems quite bleak, it seems quite gloomy. Will the coalition be able to deliver, on those tough decisions, or in general, do you think it'll be able to last, given that already, their manifestos do not tend to overlap. People's parties, more socialist party in nature. Their economic policies are different. PML-N is very different. It's more, capitalistic, business oriented, trading oriented in its nature and its agendas. How do you envision this play out?
I don't really think the PPP anymore. I mean, the Bhutto Daur was, when we had this sort of experimentation with sort of more progressive ideas, and then how they were subverted. I think after, particularly after the late 1990s, and if you look at sort of the 2008 manifesto that got the PPP in to power very firmly after Benazir Bhutto's assassination, there was not, much to differentiate them from the PML-N. And I think this is a broader trend. I mean, you can think of this when you saw the rise of Bill Clinton. I mean, he took the Democrats from the left to the center. Tony Blair did the same with Labour. Right. And which is why I think, and this also has to do with the growing influence of neoliberal policies, right? I mean, that was also happening. So, which is why, I mean, I don't want to, try and allude to a greater conspiracy, but, we have seen in the global political economy, there's also this sense that, you need to, because the top-down, trickle-down model that had been informed by the Keynesian economic model was set aside, and you increasingly had this kind of reliance on the market mechanism, which in countries like Pakistan works hand in glove with the local elites, right? So I wouldn't say that, because of IMF pressure, Pakistan won't be able to bring about populist policies. I think Pakistan won't be able to bring about progressive policies. Not that there's any political party that's seriously interested in that, right? But and some things need to happen, like expansion of the tax base. It needs to happen, but the devil lies in the detail. And many of the IMF, World Bank prescriptions want to do it in a way that they don't challenge the global political order, right? And it is about the priority given is to the debt servicing, and to try and plug in, these poorer countries into a global economic model which is lopsided. So, that is going to continue. There'll be pressure, on sort of, the energy subsidies, and many of these subsidies are also elite captured. I mean, even the wheat procurement price, for instance, the IMF and World Bank want it gone. A lot of the benefit of that goes to the middleman in any way. It's not, so it's rhetorically in the name of the poor, but a lot of the subsidies are captured also by vested interests. So there is some tussle there, but I think by and large, and those tough decisions have to be there. There are these other bilateral, relationships, which, brings in geostrategic implications as well. But the Chinese, loan has grown significantly on the country. I mean, there are so many debts which are maturing in these coming years,
Yeah.
right? And how is the establishment then going to negotiate with these big, big bilateral donors, with the multilaterals? But there doesn't seem to be much relief coming, in from either side. I mean, be it from sort of, the Chinese development model that's been playing out in the country, or the Western one, because we haven't even been able to follow the Bangladeshi model, which has been trying to um, uh, come at the bottom of the garment apparel sector, right, to
Yeah.
keep supplying fast fashion. So I don't know how much real empowerment that has enabled, but that's an acceptable model for development, right? I mean, it's great if you get a woman to stitch, an endless number of jeans for just over $2, right? And they can feed into this
Yeah.
this
The value
model which
chain.
is
Yeah. Yeah.
value chain, which is very
Mm.
profitable at the top and exploitative the lower you
Yeah.
go down into those supply chain nodes. So I think those are the prescriptions that are going to come. There'll be some give and take, but by and large, that economic model within a very skewed and asymmetrical kind of political economy that Pakistan has is going to, produce lackluster results at best. And that is after the immediate pressure of default is averted. If Pakistan can manage to negotiate, a longer loan arrangement, but even then, I mean, it's the prospects of sustainable economic development remain, are not even, anywhere on the horizon that I see.
No, these are actually some very phenomenal points and key considerations that you've raised, and I wouldn't agree more to the fact that yes, the prescriptions that are the international political economy prescriptions that are usually prescribed and that are forced upon developing countries tend to realize into very unskewed results, which tend to favor the elite or favor those who sit at the top of the value chain than compared to those who are at the bottom. But all in all, I hope the coalition government is able to make some positive decisions that drill down and impact positively the lives of Pakistan citizens. On that note, I'd really like to thank you for your time. It was an absolute pleasure having this discussion and having your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ernest.